In this video, we're going to learn how to implement Shadcn UI library in Next.js 14, specifically the app router. We're going to look at the components, the CLI tool that allows you to install and copy these components into your app. We're going to build this dashboard together. This is an example dashboard from Shadcn. And then we're going to implement the light and dark theme, just as you see here. And at the end, we're going to also extend it to bring in more theming options to Shadcn using CSS variables that allows you to really customize these components to your own specific project. So let's get into it. We're going to build this from scratch together. So let's go to this NextJs. I'm going to include a link to this template in the description. This is a Next TypeScript starter kit. You can use this template, create a new repository, and then clone it down. So let's call this Next Shadcn. I'm going to call this a starter. And then we're going to create this repository. This is going to copy that template and then create a new repository, which we can clone down so you can use that template yourself. So we're starting from the same point that we can then clone this. I'm going to bring this into my local dev here and git clone into that library. Let me just change the folders. Okay, let's open up the DevTools. Let's run pnpmi to install all the dependencies. I'm using pnpm. You can use any other package manager that you like. So that's the first step of installing our starter kit. So let's run the development server to test everything is working. Opening up localhost port 3000. Okay, good. So we have our starter application here. Let's go to Shadcn and see how we would go about installing Shadcn. So in the documentation page, you can see this installation. You can choose Next.js as a framework. The first step is to create an Next.js app. We've already done that. So we're going to go to the next step, which is running this init command from Shadcn to initialize Shadcn and create some files inside of our project that allows us to use Shadcn. Now, a little introduction or a little note about Shadcn. This is not a library in that it's not an npm package you install. It's just a bunch of components you can copy and paste to your code. The only thing that would get installed once you run the init command is Radix UI or Radix UI, which is a component library that exposes some primitive components, and Shadcn is built on top of that. But Shadcn on its own, it's not a component library. So going back to the installation for Next.js, we have to run this command. Once you click on this copy, you can select the package manager that you have. Let me stop the dev server again. I'm going to close this off for a second and paste this. So if you run the init command, this is going to ask us a few questions about how we want to set up Shadcn. So there's two different styles you can set up. So let me just go to one of these components, for example, the card. You can see each one of these components have two styles. One is the New York and the other one is a default. Default has more padding and it's a bit bulkier. New York is a bit smaller, or they're a bit different. So you can pick and choose whatever style that you want, and whatever style that you choose here cannot be changed later. I choose New York. You can then choose a base color for your gray. There's different grays in Tailwind CSS. Our project is working with TypeScript and Tailwind CSS, and you can choose whatever you want. I like the shade of the zinc gray. And it's asking whether or not we want to use CSS variables for colors. Now, later on, I'm going to explain how theming works in Shadcn, but mainly just to touch on it from a high level now, there's two ways you can use or implement theming. One is using CSS variables. The other one is using Tailwind CSS utility classes. If you've been working with Tailwind CSS, you know things like background and then changing the background. Then you have the dark variant is using Tailwind CSS utility classes, whereas CSS variables is that you would define these type of colors instead of the zinc 950. You would define this as BG background, as you can see here, and text foreground. And then inside of your CSS, you would define these colors with CSS variables, and then you can switch them up depending on whether you are on a light theme or a dark theme, and later on even maybe a different color. Because it gives us more flexibility, we're going to use CSS variables in this case to implement theming, and we're going to see this in action later on. So let's click yes. And as I mentioned, this is going to go ahead and install the dependencies and initialize the component.json. Let's go to our code. Component.json is how Shadcn understands our project structure and some aliases for how we want to import component and whatnot, and the style that we picked, which is done automatically once you run the script. Now going back to the installation, so we ran the init command, we answered the questions. Now quick note about fonts. Shadcn or these components are using the Inter font that comes out of the box when you install NextJs. So if you go to app to layout, by default, we are using the same Inter font, but you can change it if you want. You can import a different font, and then you just set a CSS variable for it, and then use it here. I do have a video on the channel where I talk about this new font package and how you can use it with or without Tailwind. I'm going to include a link in the card or the description, so you can watch that video. But basically, here you have an option to change the default font, and then you would pass the new variable to your Tailwind config as well. This is a little note about the structure of the app. So the components that we copy from Shadcn, if you use the CLI or the command line tool, it is going to copy them inside of a UI folder in your component. So right now, it has created this components folder for me. And inside of it is going to, once we copy a component like a button, it's going to create this UI folder inside of it and then create the rest or to copy the components there. Now the other thing that Shadcn also did was this lib and utils inside of it. This is a CN function that allows us to merge Tailwind classes, because to a lot of these components you can pass in your own classes. This function allows you to merge them safely with the classes that has been set from Shadcn. And that's pretty much it. So we can go ahead and add any of these components that we can see here to our application. So let's, for example, go to the button page. Here you can see a preview and you can copy the code here. And down here you can use the CLI tool or the command line tool to copy this automatically inside of your application. So let me just copy this, select the PNPM and see how this works. Let me clear this out. Let me close this up. So I'm going to copy this command, which is Shadcn UI latest add button. So it's really the add command. If you're using npx, it will be npx, the name of the package, and then the add. We ran the init command to initialize Shadcn, and now we run the add command, and then we pass in the component name. So if I enter here, it's going to just copy the specific button component inside the UI folder of the components. So let's go to our components folder and see this in action. Let me just make this a bit bigger. Now you can see I have this UI folder and the button inside of it. Now when you run this add command, if you don't pass in any component name there, so if we just pass in the same add command without any component name, this is going to actually ask you what components you want to install. So if you already know what components you want to install, for example, for our dashboard, we can go through the list of the components that we need, and instead of having to copy this command one by one for every component, you can just run the add command, don't pass any components, and then you have a list of all the components here that you can just go ahead and select. With the space you would select or unselect, and then you would move up and down with the arrow keys. And once you're done with your selection, so for example, I need the card. Let's say I also need the drop-down menu. I know I need the input, and then I hit enter, and this is going to go ahead and install all the three components. So it's a bit faster than copying one by one. And that's how you would add these components inside of your app. So let's go to our UI, and you can see all of those components are now added to my UI folder. And that's the easiest way to add this component to your app. Now, one note about the CSS variables that was set up here. Let me just close this off so we have more space. So inside of our project, if you go to tailwind config.ts, you could see that these CSS variables were added to extend the colors or utility classes from Tailwind. Now we're going to have a primary color, a secondary color, a destructive color, and whatnot. And inside of our CSS or global CSS here, you can see that we've already set some of these CSS variables. So we have the root, this is for the light theme. And then we also have by default the dark theme supported as well. Now we're going to see this in action and the built-in support for light and dark theme once we copy a component. So let's go to our app actually, and inside of our page, and let's bring in a component here. Let's go to the card, let's go to the code, and let's just bring in this card component from here. Let's go back inside of this section, maybe down here. We just paste in this card, and then we have to import these components. Let's see if we have all of them. So let's copy, and then here I'm going to paste in these components. Now we need the label we don't have, and also the select, so we can install these by running the add and then adding the label and the select. So let's select these two components. I'm going to come down, get the label and also the select component, hit enter to install these components. Now once that's done, let's restart the dev server. I think I'm missing this opening thingy here, so let's save this up. And if I go to the app now and restart, we see our card component. Let's give this a margin top of 12 so it has a little room there. Now I want to show you the built-in support for the light and dark theme using the CSS variables that we have already copied. So if I come here inside of my root layout and pass a class name of dark and save, my app turns into a dark mode, and the component automatically supports this because inside of our Tailwind config, what we have defined or what was copied as part of the process is that this dark mode is set to class now. And then inside of our global CSS, this is where we're actually switching our CSS classes or CSS variables depending if we are inside of a dark class. So when we have this dark class on the HTML, which is the parent of all these components, it gets applied. So those CSS variables are going to get picked up, and automatically we have this light and dark theme. Now we can take this further by implementing a theme switcher using the Next Themes package. So if you scroll up here under dark mode, it actually explains that you can go ahead and install the Next Themes package. So let's go ahead and actually do this together. So PM again, and then we're going to extend this to also include other themes, which you can see here under the theming in Shadcn. Okay, so that's done. Let's go ahead and create a theme provider. So inside of our components folder, I'm going to create a theme provider.tsx. I'm going to copy this code. Now I do have a video on the channel for adding light and dark theme to the app router in Next.js 13 or 14. For that matter, they're the same. So if you're not comfortable with using the Next Themes package, I'm going to link in the cart or description somewhere for you to watch that video. Now, sometimes even though you have installed the package, VS Code might give you some hard time for types declarations. Now, what you can do is that hit Command-Shift-P to open the command palette from your VS Code and type in TypeScript there. I have it as the first. And here, instead of using the VS Code version of TypeScript, you need to select to use the workspace version of TypeScript. And sometimes doing this will just resolve the problem. So the first step, we installed the Next Themes package. We created this themes provider. Now what we can do is to wrap our entire children inside of our root layout with this themes provider. Now this is a client component that uses React context to share the theme state. A common question that I often get on the channel is, if we are now wrapping our entire application in our root layout with a client component, does this turn our app into a client component? And the answer is no. You can interweave and interleave client and server components without changing your server components. And the way that it works is that you can pass server components as children to client components, as we're doing here. We're passing in this children. So this is going to be the parent of our server component. So imagine that there's going to be holes or slots for your server components to be plugged in inside of your client components. And the only thing that you cannot do, or if you do, it would turn your server components into client components, is that if you import a server component into a client component, once you cross that boundary that's marked with this use client, you become a client component. And if you're, for example, running an asynchronous function, it would throw an error. But sometimes you're not running any asynchronous function, you just import a component inside of a client component, it just becomes a client component. It's good to know that. So we have done that part as well. So let's go down, and now we need to add a mode toggle. So let's go ahead and get the code from here. I'm going to create another component. Well, let's move this theme provider inside of a component instead of the UI, because this is not really a UI component. And then inside of my component, I'm going to create a theme toggle.tsx. Let's also copy the code here. Do we have all the components? Seems like we do. Let's just rename this to theme toggle. So let's go back inside of our page. And now I can just maybe bring it in here just to show you how it will work. So theme toggle. And now if I refresh and go back to our application, if I refresh, we see this button added here. If you click on it, it's going to open up a drop down. You can select a dark theme. This is now just setting a dark class. Same thing that I did inside of my layout. So actually I can go here and remove this dark class. So what next theme does is just to set this class for you. So on the HTML, you can see now we have this dark class set. If I change this to light, it changes the class to light and then changes it back to dark. And the system just picks up whatever the user has set inside of their system. So let's recap what we have done so far. So we have initialized or installed Shadcn inside of our Next.js app. We have copied some components over, some UI components, as well as some theme related components. We have installed the Next Themes package that allows us to set a class or share our theme state globally inside of our app and set a class inside of our HTML class tag so that the CSS variables that already comes built in from Shadcn that supports the light and dark theme is going to actually work with this toggling button that we saw. Now, if you wanted to extend themes inside Shadcn, you can. So on the documentation page, there's this theming section where it talks about the same concept that we talked already about using utility classes or using CSS variables. We have selected to use CSS variables. Now, all there's left for you to do really to change the theme of your application is to change the values that you are pasting in here for each of these CSS variables. It does define what CSS variables they are using, or you can see them right here. You can change the values here, and then you would have a new theme. So we have one for the dark and one for the regular. Now going back to the themes here, for example, you can see there are different themes that you can select, different colors that comes built in. So it provides you with some of these values already. So you can go ahead and say, I want the orange one. I want my border radius to be 1 and the mode to be light. So I'm going to copy this code. It is going to give me what I need for my light and dark theme for these CSS variables. So I'm going to copy them from here, and let's just remove this base layer and change it. So now going back inside of my app, I have now turned this into that theme, and you can see the border radius actually also changed. So if I go to light, it supports the light version of this new theme or the dark version of it. Now, you might as well want to add a theme here, and you can. All you need to do really is to go to your theme provider in your root layout, and now you can here add an array of themes. So let's say we want to add this orange, and once you overwrite this, you have to also provide the light and dark if you are still intending to support that. So I'm going to add this orange to my themes, light and dark. Now going back inside of my theme toggle, this is where we are actually having these drop down items. So this is the light dark that you can see here. Now what I can do here is bring in this themes. This use theme hook actually gives me back all of my themes. So what I can do here is that I can say I'm going to get the themes, map over every theme, and for each one we want to render one of these guys. So let's copy them here, and then here let's just show the theme and set the theme to that actual theme. And then let's also pass a key, be it again that theme. So VS Code is not screaming at us. Let's now remove that and save this. Now refreshing our app. Now if you can see the orange is now added here. Now what we can do here, going back to our global CSS, if I just undo what I did here and bring in the base layer that we had already, let's just go ahead and add a class here. So we want to say, if we have the orange class set, let's go to Shadcn and copy this code, for example, and paste it in here. Now what next theme is going to do once we select, let's say, orange, is that it is going to just set this class orange inside of our HTML tag. So going back here, you can see HTML now has a class of orange, right? This gets picked up by Tailwind, and because we have this class now, CSS variables are changing and switching. Now this is one way of applying themes. You can have the light and dark and then just choose which theme you want to provide for your clients, or actually allow them to select different themes that they want. But basically it's just changing or switching up the values of the CSS variables to accomplish these themes, because your components or the components that come from Shadcn UI are already built in or configured to use these CSS variables for their styling instead of Tailwind utility classes. So this is really all you need to know to use Shadcn inside Next.js. But to create that dashboard that I show in the beginning, if you go to Shadcn, there's this examples page over here where you can see different components already built in here. For example, a mail component or a mail client, a dashboard, some cards examples and whatnot. And the dashboard that I showed in the beginning is just this one. You can find the code for this on the GitHub repository. So you can just click on this GitHub and go to this UI. Now here inside of the apps, it's a bit small. I'm going to make it a bit bigger. On the app, you can see there's this examples folder where you can just copy this dashboard. This is the page, and then you have the components related to it to implement the same dashboard that you have seen in the beginning of this video. So let me copy these components and we'll see how this is working together. So inside of our page, let's just actually get rid of this and copy this page instead. Let me also bring in the necessary components over here. Let me close everything out, and this. If I go back to our application and refresh, there we go. So we have all the components now showing up. So let's actually go inside the code and see what we did here. So we replaced the content of our page with this page that came in straight out of Shadcn GitHub, which uses different components for these cards to render this nice dashboard. You have a selection for accounts, a main nav bar, a user drop down. I've also added this theme toggle switcher, so you can just change to light, change to dark, or change to orange. And then different components like this calendar or the date picker that we just installed together, or this charts that's rendered using recharts. So this is basically doing that. We needed some extra components to copy here for what's rendered inside of these cards. But pretty much that's just straight out from this examples page. There are other examples on this page that you can just toggle through and look. For example, for auth, for forms. You can get ideas, not just copy them, but get ideas on how you can use these components to render beautiful UI for your users and implement theming, whether it be light or dark theme or any other theme for that matter. And that's a wrap for this video. We implemented Shadcn In our Next.js app, we copied components, we learned about the built-in support for the light and dark theme, and also the extendable themes that come in with the power of CSS variables. You can create a template out of this for yourself. I will probably do this same thing and include a link in the repo where you can just start an Next.js app, which is just like the other starter that we had with TypeScript and Tailwind CSS, but this time we also add in the basic things that we need from Shadcn, such as the theme provider and the structure that we need for Shadcn to work. So every time you're starting a new project, if you intend to use this component library, it just has everything already set up for you to remove any duplicate work anytime that you're starting a new project. If you have any questions, hit me up in the comments, like always, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.